The word appeared in 17 languages before anyone understood what it meant. Not the translation. The translation was simple. Every species in the conclave had a word that mapped to enough, had a concept for sufficiency, for the point at which a quantity met a need. The translation was not the problem. The problem was what the word meant when a human said it in the specific register that the 17 transmissions had all used, in the tone and the context, and with the weight that had attached itself to that particular word over 11,000 years of a species finding the point at which it had had enough. The 17 transmissions came from 17 different human diplomatic officers across 17 different regional situations over the course of 8 months. They were not coordinated. Nobody had sent a memo that said use this word. The word appeared because the situations had reached the point where the word was accurate and humans, when something was accurate, said it. The Valith Sovereignty's Intelligence Division collected the 17 transmissions as part of its standard diplomatic monitoring protocol. It processed them. It noted the common element. It flagged the common element for analysis. The analysis took 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, the Intelligence Division's senior analyst, a meticulous being named Vorath who had been in the division for 22 years, and who had developed across those 22 years the capacity to be disturbed by things that other analysts filed as data, submitted a report. The report was 8 pages. The first page described the 17 transmissions and the common element. The second page described the contexts in which each transmission had been made. The third page described the translation and why the translation was insufficient. Pages 4 through 7 described what the word meant when a human said it in that register and in those contexts and with that weight. Page 8 said, recommend immediate briefing of senior command. The senior command received the briefing on a Thursday. Grand Admiral Thessaly Coron had been in the Valith Sovereignty's military command for 29 years. She had the specific quality of someone who had spent 29 years making decisions with incomplete information in high-stakes environments, and who had developed, across those 29 years, the instinct for when incomplete information was incomplete in a way that required immediate action, and when it was incomplete in the tolerable way that all information was always somewhat incomplete. She read the 8 pages. She said, this is the second category. Her aide said, Grand Admiral. She said, the incomplete information. It is incomplete in the intolerable way. She said, bring me Vorath. Vorath arrived in 40 minutes. He was a small and careful being who moved with the economy of someone who had learned that excess motion in a room full of senior military officers was inadvisable. She said, walk me through page 4. He said, page 4 describes the historical record of the word appearing in the specific register. The register is what the linguistic analysis calls a terminal assessment marker. It indicates that the speaker has completed the process of evaluation and has arrived at a conclusion that the evaluation will not be revisited. She said, a decision that has been made. He said, a decision that has been made and that will not be unmade. Yes. She said, and the historical record. He said, the historical record goes back to the beginning of Earth's documented linguistic history. The word in various languages and various forms has appeared in this register at specific moments across 11,000 years. He said, the moments share characteristics. She said, what characteristics? He said, they are moments that precede significant changes in Earth's behavior, not intentions, behavior. The word appears and then something changes about what Earth does. The change is not always immediate. Sometimes there is a gap between the word and the change, but the gap closes. She said, what changes? He said, the analysis identifies 3 categories of change that have followed the word in the historical record. He said, the first category is withdrawal. Earth stops doing the thing it was doing, not because it was defeated, because it decided to stop. The withdrawal is complete and it does not reverse. He said, the second category is escalation. Earth begins doing something at a scale or intensity that it had not previously done in the situation, not a gradual increase, a change in kind. He said, the third category is restructuring. Earth changes the terms of the situation entirely, not the outcome it is seeking within the existing terms but the terms themselves. She said, which category applies to the 17 transmissions? He said, the analysis cannot determine this from the transmissions alone. The category depends on what Earth has assessed as the thing that has reached the limit of enough. She said, explain. He said, the word marks a conclusion. The conclusion is that a specific thing has reached the point where Earth will not accept more of it. What happens next depends on what the thing is and what options Earth has for addressing it. He said, if the thing is something Earth can withdraw from, withdrawal follows. He said, if the thing is something Earth needs to resolve and cannot withdraw from, escalation follows. He said, if the thing is a structural problem that cannot be addressed within the existing framework, restructuring follows. She said, and the 17 situations. He said, are 17 different situations. The word appeared in 17 different contexts. The analysis cannot determine from the word alone which category will follow in each case. The analysis can determine that something will follow. She said, it can determine that something will change. He said, yes. She said, in 17 situations simultaneously. He said the transmissions were not simultaneous. They occurred across 8 months, but yes, across 17 situations, in 8 months, the word appeared 17 times. She said, in the sovereignty's monitoring record, how many times has the word appeared in this register in the previous 8 months? He said twice. She said, and the 8 months before that? He said once. She said, and the 8 months before that? He said, 4 times across 3 years total. She said, and in the last 8 months? He said 17. The room was quiet. She said, something changed 8 months ago. He said, the analysis identifies what changed 8 months ago. She said, what? He said, the sovereignty's regional expansion operations began 8 months ago. She said, the operations that have been proceeding on schedule. He said, yes. She said, the operations that the Strategic Planning Division assessed as proceeding within acceptable diplomatic friction parameters. He said, yes. She said, the operations that have produced 17 instances of the word in 8 months. He said, yes. She said, and the word means that Earth has reached the limit of what it will accept. He said, the word means that the evaluation is complete and the conclusion has been reached and the conclusion will not be revisited. She said, in 17 situations. He said, yes. She said, simultaneously. He said, within 8 months, yes. She said, what does it mean when the word appears 17 times in 8 months in situations that share the common element of the sovereignty's regional expansion operations? He said, the analysis concludes that Earth has assessed the sovereignty's regional expansion operations as the thing that has reached the limit. She said, not 17 separate things. He said, the 17 situations are different surface expressions of the same underlying assessment. The regional expansion operations have produced conditions in 17 situations that have each separately reached the point where Earth's assessment is complete, and the conclusion is that more of this is not acceptable. She said, 17 separate situations, 17 separate diplomatic officers, 17 separate assessments, all arriving at the same word in 8 months. He said, yes. She said, without coordination. He said, The intelligence monitoring has not identified coordination between the 17 diplomatic officers. The assessments appear to have been reached independently. She said independently. He said yes. She said which means. He said, which means the situation has been clear enough to 17 different observers in 17 different contexts to produce the same conclusion without anyone needing to communicate that conclusion to the others. She said it was obvious. He said to 17 different humans in 17 different situations. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. She said page 8. He said yes. She said, recommend immediate briefing of senior command. He said yes. She said, what does the senior command do with this briefing? He said, the analysis does not prescribe action. The analysis characterizes the situation. She said, characterize it for me, in your own words, not the report language. He said, in my own words. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Earth has been watching the sovereignty's regional expansion operations for 8 months. The operations have been producing conditions in 17 situations that Earth has been evaluating. The evaluation is now complete. 17 diplomatic officers independently have reached the conclusion that the point of enough has been reached. The word has appeared in the transmissions. The word means the evaluation is done and the conclusion will not change. He said, what follows the word in the historical record is not a warning. The word is the last communication that precedes the change in behavior. The historical record does not show Earth issuing the word and then waiting for the other party to respond and then potentially reconsidering. The historical record shows Earth issuing the word and then changing what it does. He said, the word is not a negotiating position. It is a notification. She said, a notification that something is going to change. He said, a notification that Earth has decided that something is going to change. Yes. She said, and we received 17 of them. He said, yes. She said, in 8 months. He said, yes. She said, and we are only reading them now. He said, the monitoring collected them as they arrived. The pattern was not identified until the analysis was run. The analysis was requested 3 weeks ago. She said, why was it not run earlier? He said, the word appeared in individual transmissions that were processed individually. The individual transmissions were not flagged as significant. The pattern became visible only when the transmissions were analyzed collectively. She said, 17 individual transmissions, each one not flagged as significant, collectively the most significant pattern in the monitoring record in 8 months. He said, yes. She said, we were looking at trees. He said, Grand Admiral. She said, we were looking at individual transmissions. We were not looking at the forest. He said, the analytical framework was designed to flag significant individual transmissions. It was not designed to identify significance in the aggregate. She said, it was designed for the closed board. He said, Grand Admiral. She said, never mind. How long ago did the first transmission appear? He said, 7 months and 12 days ago. She said, and we are reading it now. He said, yes. She said, 7 months and 12 days after the first notification. He said, yes. She said, and we do not know what category follows, withdrawal, escalation, or restructuring. He said, the analysis cannot determine the category from the transmissions alone. She said, can it determine anything about the likelihood of each category? He said, the analysis identifies factors associated with each category in the historical record. She said, what factors? He said, withdrawal is associated with situations where the thing Earth has reached enough on is something Earth values but can disengage from without structural damage, where the cost of continued engagement exceeds the value of the engagement. He said, Escalation is associated with situations where the thing Earth has reached enough on is something Earth cannot disengage from because disengaging would cost more than escalating, where the conditions that have produced enough will continue or worsen without active intervention. He said, restructuring is associated with situations where the thing Earth has reached enough on is the framework within which the situations are occurring, where the individual situations are not the problem, but are symptoms of a structural problem that individual responses cannot address. She said, which of those describes the current situation? He said, the regional expansion operations have produced conditions in 17 situations. The conditions are varied. Some are trade-related, some are territorial, some are diplomatic, some involve third parties. He said, the common element is the sovereignty's expansion operations. She said, which are not something Earth can disengage from because the operations are occurring in regions adjacent to Earth's interests. He said, yes. She said, which means withdrawal is unlikely. He said, the analysis assesses withdrawal as the least likely category given the geographic and strategic relationships involved. She said, an escalation versus restructuring. He said, the analysis cannot determine this with confidence. The 17 situations are distributed across the sovereignty's full expansion operational area. If Earth's assessment is of specific situations, escalation in those situations is possible. If Earth's assessment is of the expansion operations as a whole, restructuring of the framework within which the operations occur is more likely. She said, what does restructuring of the framework look like? He said, the historical record shows restructuring events as significant changes to the strategic environment in which a situation is occurring, not adjustments within the existing environment. Changes to the environment itself. She said, what kind of changes? He said, the historical record includes the following types: changes to the strategic balance in the region through asset repositioning, changes to the alliance and partnership structure, changes to the economic and trade framework that the operations depend on, changes to the conclave's engagement with the situations through Earth's advocacy in that body. He said, and in the most significant restructuring events in the historical record. He stopped. She said, say it. He said, in the most significant restructuring events, Earth changed what it was in the region, not what it was doing, what it was. She said, explain. He said, the historical record shows events where Earth's response to a situation reaching the point of enough was to become a different kind of presence in the region, more capable, more integrated, more positioned. The events where the word appeared in the most significant historical moments were followed by Earth-building things, relationships, infrastructure, capability. The building was not a response to specific situations. It was the restructuring of Earth's fundamental position. She said, they become harder to manage. He said, they become a different kind of party. Yes. She said, and the 17 transmissions. He said, are the notification that the assessment is complete. She said, and the building may have already begun. He said, the analysis cannot determine when the behavior change begins relative to when the notification is issued. The historical record suggests that sometimes the change precedes the notification. The notification is not the beginning of the change. The notification is the communication of a conclusion that has already been reached. She said, the decision was made before the word was said. He said, yes. She said, and the word is the last communication before the change in behavior. He said, yes. She said, and we received the first notification 7 months and 12 days ago. He said, yes. She said, and we are reading it now. He said, yes. She said, so the change in behavior. He said, may have been underway for 7 months. The room was very quiet. She said, what is Earth doing in the regions covered by the expansion operations? He said, The standard monitoring reports cover Earth's observable activity in those regions. She said, pull them, the last 8 months, everything. The monitoring reports were pulled. She read them. She read them with the attention of someone who had been told that the forest was significant and was now looking at the trees for evidence of the forest. She said this. She pointed at an item in the 3rd month's report, a notation of increased Earth commercial activity in one of the corridor systems adjacent to a sovereignty expansion operation. She said, and this. She pointed at an item in the 5th month's report, Earth diplomatic contact established with a small civilization in the buffer zone between sovereignty territory and Earth's regional presence. She said, and this. She pointed at an item in the 6th month's report. Earth's exploration program had filed new survey data for a region that had not previously been extensively surveyed, a region that the expansion operations had been planning to use for a later phase. She said, and this. She pointed at an item in the 7th month's report. Earth had submitted a conclave regulatory proposal regarding resource extraction standards in contested corridor systems. The proposal was described in the monitoring report as routine regulatory advocacy. She said, and this. She pointed at an item in the 8th month's report. 3 civilizations in the buffer zone that Earth had contacted had independently applied for expanded trade relationship status with the conclave, a status that carried specific protections, and that would make the later phases of the expansion operations significantly more complicated. She looked at Voreth. She said none of these were flagged as significant individually. He said no. She said, because each one is individually explicable as routine. He said yes. She said commercial activity increases, diplomatic contacts are established, survey data is filed, regulatory proposals are made, trade applications are submitted. He said, all within normal parameters for Earth's standard regional activity. She said individually. He said yes. She said collectively. She looked at the items she had marked across 8 months of monitoring reports. She said, collectively they are the outline of something. He said yes. She said, what is the outline? He said, the outline is a restructuring of the strategic environment in the regions adjacent to the expansion operations. The commercial activity creates economic relationships that complicate the operations. The diplomatic contacts create political relationships. The survey data creates an information asymmetry in the region that previously favored the sovereignty's planning. The regulatory proposal creates a legal framework that constrains the later phases. The trade applications create protected status for civilizations that would otherwise be available for absorption. He said, individually these are routine activities that occur in the ordinary course of Earth's regional presence. He said, collectively they are the infrastructure of a different strategic environment than the one the expansion operations were planned for. She said, and the planning for the later phases of the expansion operations. He said, was based on the strategic environment that existed at the beginning of the operations. She said 8 months ago. He said yes. She said before the word appeared 17 times. He said yes. She said before the outline began. He said yes. She said, the later phases of the expansion operations are planned for a strategic environment that is being restructured around them. He said yes. She said, and we did not see it because we were looking at individual items. He said yes. She said, because our monitoring framework was designed to flag significant individual items. He said yes. She said, and Earth was not doing significant individual things. He said no. She said, Earth was doing many insignificant individual things that are collectively significant. He said yes. She said, how do you monitor that? He said, you change the analytical framework. She said, to look for the forest. He said, to look for patterns across items rather than significance within items. Yes. She said, and if we had been looking for the forest? He said, we would have identified the outline 3 to 4 months ago. She said, and if we had identified it 3 to 4 months ago? He said, the later phases of the expansion operations could have been replanned. She said, and now? He said, and now the outline is 7 months developed, and the replanning is significantly more constrained. She said, because the commercial relationships are established. He said, yes. She said, and the diplomatic contacts are established. He said, yes. She said, and the survey data is filed in public. He said, yes. She said, and the regulatory proposal is in process. He said, yes. She said, and 3 civilizations have trade applications pending. He said, yes. She said, all of which happened while we were reading individual monitoring items and classifying them as routine. He said, yes. She was quiet for a long time. She said, Voreth. He said, yes. She said, the word, in the 17 transmissions. You said it is a notification that the decision was made before the word was said. He said, yes. She said, which means the outline was already underway when the word appeared. He said, the analysis suggests yes. The behavioral changes may have been initiated before or concurrent with the issuance of the word. She said, the word was not the warning. He said, no. She said, the word was the communication of a conclusion that had already been implemented. He said, yes. She said, we were notified 7 months ago. He said, yes. She said, of a decision that had already been made. He said, yes. She said, and we spent 7 months not reading the notification. He said, yes. She said, while the decision was being implemented around us. He said, yes. She looked at the monitoring reports. At the outline that 7 months of insignificant individual items had assembled. She said, what is the current status of the later phases of the expansion operations? Her operations officer said, the later phases are scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, Grand Admiral. She said, and the strategic environment they were planned for. He said, is being assessed against current conditions now, per your instruction. She said, and the assessment? He said, preliminary assessment indicates significant divergence from planned conditions in 3 of the 7 later phase operational areas. She said, significant? He said, yes, Grand Admiral. She said, produced by? He said, changes in the strategic environment in those areas over the preceding 8 months. She said, changes that were not individually flagged as significant. He said, no, Grand Admiral. She said, but that are collectively significant. He said, yes. She said, because they were designed to be collectively significant and individually routine. He said, yes. She looked at the monitoring reports one more time. She said, Voreth, the historical record, after the word appears, after the restructuring begins, in the most significant events. He said, yes. She said, what does Earth do when the restructuring is complete? He said, the historical record shows that when the restructuring is complete, when the new strategic environment is established, Earth returns to standard engagement. The restructuring is not permanent escalation. It is a reset. Earth establishes the conditions it needs and then operates within those conditions. She said, they build the board they want and then play on it. He said, that is a reasonable characterization. Yes. She said, and when the board is built? He said, the board is stable. The conditions are established. Engaging with Earth on the new board is engaging with an Earth that has the strategic environment it has decided to have. She said, and the sovereignty's expansion operations. He said, will be operating on the board Earth is building. She said, unless we address it in the next 6 weeks. He said, the later phases can be replanned if the decision is made quickly. The outline is 7 months developed, but it is not complete. 3 of the 7 operational areas show significant divergence. The other 4 are within manageable parameters, if the 3 divergent areas are addressed. She said, how are they addressed? He said, the commercial relationships can be disrupted through trade mechanisms. The diplomatic contacts can be complicated through parallel diplomatic engagement. The survey data is public and cannot be retracted, but its use can be managed through regulatory channels. The trade applications can be opposed through the conclave process. She said, each of which Earth will monitor. He said, yes. She said, and respond to. He said, yes. She said, with further adjustments to the outline. He said, yes. She said, because we are now playing on a board that Earth designed and Earth knows the board better than we do. He said, yes. She said, because Earth designed it. He said, yes. She was quiet for a moment. She said, what happens if we proceed with the later phases as planned? He said, the later phases encounter the conditions that exist rather than the conditions that were planned for. The operations are not impossible. They are more costly and more complicated and less likely to achieve the planned outcomes within the planned parameters. She said, and what happens if we suspend the later phases? He said, the expansion operations stop at the current point. The sovereignty retains what it has gained in the first phases. Earth's outline stabilizes around the current boundary. She said, and the word. He said, the word indicated that Earth had reached the limit. If the operations stop, the limit is no longer being tested. She said, Earth would stop building the outline. He said, the historical record suggests that when the thing that produced enough stops, the restructuring stops. Earth does not continue restructuring past the point where the thing has been addressed. She said, they build what they need and then stop. He said, yes. She said, if we stop, they stop. He said, the analysis suggests yes. She said, and the board. He said, the board would be the board as it is now, not the board they were building, not the board we planned for, the board as it is now. She said, which is different from what we planned for. He said, yes. She said, because of 7 months of individually routine items. He said, yes. She looked at the monitoring reports. She said, and if we try to undo the 7 months? He said, the analysis has not modeled this specifically. The historical record does not have clear precedent for attempting to dismantle an Earth restructuring in progress. She said, why not? He said, because in the historical record, parties that recognized the restructuring early enough to attempt to dismantle it generally chose to address the underlying thing that had produced enough rather than contest the restructuring directly. She said, because contesting it directly. He said, produces more of the thing that produced enough. She said, yes. She said, and addressing the underlying thing. He said, stops the restructuring. She said, because the restructuring is not the response. The restructuring is what happens when the response to the underlying thing is inadequate. He said, yes. She said, the restructuring is what enough produces when the thing that has reached enough does not stop. He said, yes. She said, so if we want the restructuring to stop. He said, we address the thing. She said, the expansion operations. He said, yes. She said, or a specific aspect of them that produced the 17 transmissions. He said, the analysis cannot identify with precision which aspect of the operations produced the 17 specific assessments of enough. The situations are varied. Some may be addressed without stopping the operations entirely. She said, and if we can identify which aspects. He said, and address those aspects. She said, the word stops appearing. He said, the analysis suggests yes. She said, and we need to know which aspects produced it. He said, yes. She said, which requires asking Earth. He said, or analyzing the 17 situations in detail to identify the common factor within the variations. She said, both. He said, yes. She said, pull the 17 situations, full analysis, what was happening in each situation that produced the transmission, what the common factor is. He said, yes, Grand Admiral. She said, and open a communication channel to Earth's Foreign Affairs Division. He said, to ask. She said, to ask what the 17 situations had in common from Earth's perspective. He said, they may not answer. She said, they may not, but the question itself is information. The question tells Earth that we read the transmissions, that we understand what the word means, that we are asking about the common factor rather than disputing that the limit has been reached. He said, you are communicating that the sovereignty has understood the notification. She said 7 months late, but yes. He said, yes, Grand Admiral. She said, and Voreth. He said, yes. She said, the monitoring framework. He said, yes. She said, change it. He said, to look for the forest. She said, to look for patterns across items rather than significance within items. Yes. He said, yes. She said, and add the word to the priority flag list. He said, it is already on the list as of this analysis. She said, in all 17 languages. He said, all documented human languages. Yes. She said, and any other register indicators associated with terminal assessments. He said, yes. She said, in real time. He said, yes. She said, so the next time a human diplomatic officer says the word, we read it in real time rather than 7 months later. He said, yes. She said, because the next 7 months are the months where things are built. He said, yes. She said, and we will not have 7 months available to us next time. He said, possibly not. She said, no, we will not. She said, because Earth will know we can read the word now. He said, yes. She said, and the next communication may not use the word. He said, the analysis notes this possibility. Yes. She said, which means we also need to monitor for the absence of the word in situations where the word might be expected. He said, the forest. She said, the forest, yes. He said, yes, Grand Admiral. She looked at the 8-page report on her desk, at the 7 months of monitoring reports, at the outline that had assembled itself from individually routine items while the sovereignty's analytical framework was looking at trees. She said, Voreth. He said, yes. She said, you wrote on page 8 that senior command should be briefed immediately. He said, yes. She said, the report was submitted 3 weeks ago. He said, yes. She said, and senior command was briefed today. He said, yes. She said, 3 weeks after the report was submitted. He said, the report went through the standard distribution process. She said, the standard distribution process. He said, yes. She said, which was designed for individual significant items. He said, yes. She said, not for reports about patterns across items. He said, the report was flagged as significant. It proceeded through the standard process. She said, which took 3 weeks. He said, yes. She said, 3 more weeks after 7 months. He said, yes. She said, change the distribution process. He said, for reports of this category. She said, for reports that identify patterns across items, flag them separately, route them directly. He said, yes, Grand Admiral. She said, and add this report to the analytical training curriculum. He said, as a case study. She said, as a case study in what happens when you look at trees. He said, yes. She said, and what happens when you look at forests? He said, yes. She said, and what a single word can mean when a species has been using it for 11,000 years. He said, yes. She said, that last one is important. He said, yes. She said, because the word will appear again. He said, the analysis assesses high probability of recurrence given Earth's regional engagement patterns. She said, yes. She said, and when it appears again, we will read it. He said, yes. She said, in real time. He said, yes. She said, and we will understand what we are reading. He said, yes. She said, and we will not spend 7 months looking at trees. He said, no, Grand Admiral. She said, good. She said, go build the analysis of the 17 situations. He said, yes. He left. She sat with the report and the monitoring records, and the outline of 7 months of individually routine items that were collectively the most significant thing in the sovereignty's recent strategic history. She thought about the word. She thought about 17 diplomatic officers, independently reaching the same conclusion in 8 months, without coordination. She thought about what it meant that the conclusion had been reached independently, that the situations had been clear enough to produce the same word in 17 different contexts, without anyone needing to tell anyone else to say it. She thought about 11,000 years of a species finding the point at which it had had enough and saying so. She thought about what it meant that the word had a sound and a weight and a register that 22 years of experience in the intelligence division had taught Vorath to recognize, and that her 29 years of military command had taught her to believe. She thought about trees and forests, and boards and games and outlines assembled from individually routine items. She thought about enough. She thought that enough was not a complicated word. She thought that was the point. She thought that the most significant words were never complicated. She opened the communication channel to Earth's Foreign Affairs Division. She drafted the message herself. She wrote, "This is Grand Admiral Thessaly Koron of the Valith Sovereignty Strategic Command. We have read the 17 transmissions. We understand what they mean. We would like to discuss what they were responding to. We are available at your convenience." She read it. She sent it. She waited. The response came in 4 hours. It said, "Grand Admiral Koron, we received your message. We are available tomorrow at 900 for a direct communication. We appreciate that you read the transmissions. We look forward to the conversation." She read the response. She thought about available tomorrow at 900. She thought about 7 months and 12 days. She thought about what it meant that the conversation was available tomorrow. She thought about what it meant that Earth had said available, which was a word with a history of its own. She thought about trees and forests. She sent one more message. It said, "We will be there at 900, and Grand Admiral, we want you to know something. We understand that the word was a notification. We understand that the decision had already been made. We are not here to dispute the decision. We are here to understand what produced it and what we can do about what produced it. We believe that is the right conversation to have." The response came in 11 minutes. It said, "Yes, that is the right conversation." She read it. She closed the channel. She looked at the 8-page report one more time. At page 8. At recommend immediate briefing of senior command. She thought about immediately, and 3 weeks and 7 months and the word and the outline and the forest. She thought that immediately was also a word with a history. She thought that the conversation tomorrow was going to be interesting. She thought it was going to be the right conversation. She thought that the right conversation, 7 months late, was still better than the wrong conversation on time. She thought that was itself a lesson about timing. She filed it. She went to prepare for tomorrow,